Okay. So I just learned something very interesting. There are people here now. Bum, bum, bum.
Why?
Okay.
Are you Eli Whitney?
Hey, we're broadcasting now.
I'm sorry.
Calm down. So I just learned something very valuable about Zoom is that there's multiple sign-in things for me as a host, and if I sign into the wrong thing, then it doesn't broadcast. So I was signed into a private room instead of my Bible study room, and I didn't even realize I had extra rooms. Fascinating. So what's this other thing? Now there's another. Okay. Well, thank you guys for being patient and sticking around for 15 minutes. Let me close some of this stuff up. I have a ton of windows open now on my computer because I was doing Bible study to no one, just out to the interwebs, online. You guys, so I've got a peanut gallery here, and we've been talking. Mostly they've been getting me to talk about George Bush and Helen DeGeneres. But I brought it up. Okay, it's my fault. But we're on Psalm 78. Done our prayer and everything like that, and we're actually on verse 9. So we were talking about this is what they call a historical psalm. So a historical psalm we have to be careful with is what we got talking about, because it's not a history in the sense that we're trying to recount the most accurate version of events. It's actually a recounting of events intentionally in order to develop a particular imagination within the people. They call it social imaginary. So to give an identity to the children. So that's when we get in verses 6 through 8. The next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and rise and tell them to their children. So they pass on child to child to child to child. Excuse me. So let me see. It doesn't have me as the speaker. There we go. What is this do now? Yeah, I don't want speaker view. Okay. All right. I think it's actually working now. I make fun of people for being technologically incompetent. And I've been doing this for 5 years now, and I still can't make it work. So that gets us to verse 9. So what's happened is they've set up this very long, kind of almost ritualized opening. So they probably use this in liturgical purposes. It was a recitation that somebody gave to remind them of their history and to understand it the way it was meant to be understood. So when I was saying right before I realized that this wasn't working, so I tried switching around screens and found you guys. Michael was asking me because I was saying that if some of the scholars, some atheists will criticize the Old Testament and say it's just a foundational narrative, it's a foundational myth for Israel, and this is how they made it up. I can see where they get that idea from, because it is a foundational narrative, but no sane people would ever make this their foundational narrative, that God is faithful and good and provides for us, and we just keep betraying him and violating his covenant and getting sent off into exile and only return when he decides to be faithful. But that we're a bunch of basically a bunch of screw ups, excuse me, but we just keep messing up. So and Michael said, would that be like telling the story of the American Revolution as if we were the bad guys? Well, yeah, and it's actually funny, when I was in the UK talking about the American Revolution, we're the bad guys. They were taking care of us and they were helping us out, and we turned around and we were ungrateful. And I love that one meme that goes around every 4th of July. It's a Happy Rebellion Day, you ungrateful peasants. And it's got Queen Elizabeth on it. It's just like Happy Rebellion Day. But yeah, it's exactly right. This is not a flattering account, and you're going to see it especially. It begins with the Ephraimites, which are the northern tribe of Israel, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. So let's recount our history of our people with cowardice. Yeah, that's what we're going to say. That's one of our founding narratives, is that we're a cowardly people. So this whole the Old Testament and the Psalms, as they recount the history of Israel, it's in a way to draw our minds to God and not to the might of the people, if that makes any sense. So it's never the people who prevail; it's always God, and he picks weaklings. Think about David, great King David. He was, the youngest son of a shepherd family, who's out in the woods chasing off bears, and then he had to bring.
Doesn't sound like a weakling.
I know, exactly. He's pretty cool. He was pretty good with a sling, but he wasn't a great general or a powerful nobleman or anything like that. It's very interesting. So anyway, long draw up. So the Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to his law. They forgot what he had done and the miracles that he had shown them. Okay, so this is right here. It's already setting up that that Israel is not faithful, right? And so telling these stories to the children, we need to be faithful, not like our ancestors were. But what's really interesting about this is they did not keep God's covenant and they forgot what he had done. So the correction to that is to remind them of the deeds that God has done. And what is this psalm doing? Reminding them of the deeds that God has done, right? So the psalm itself is a correction to the forgetting of God, which then makes us turn from him and not walk according to his law. In the sight of their fathers, this is the current generation, in the sight of their fathers, he wrought marvels in the land of Egypt and the fields of Zoan. He divided the sea and let them pass through it and made the waters stand up like a heap. All right, so there's your first reference. Anybody do their homework?
Exodus.
Exodus. Parting of the sea, right?
I don't know what the field of Zoan is.
Yeah, no, I'd have to look that one up myself. I'm really not sure. You could have just made it up. I think if I wrote, I just make things up. I just be like the one of my favorite is Zohar. I think there's like a lot of these names in the Old Testament sound like characters out of Star Trek. I'm pretty sure. I think Zadok is one of the names. I'm pretty sure that was a character. That was a Vulcan. Isn't that like Spock's dad or something?
Like names out of the Bible.
Okay, I'm sure that's it. Yes, Kaylin's saying that. I think the Star Trek names came out of the Bible. But anyway. So the divide the sea and let them pass through and made the water stand like a heap. That's a direct quote, an almost word for word quote from what's called the Song of the Sea, which is Exodus 15. So when Moses had brought them across the sea, they sang this song called the Song of the Sea. And it said, and God piled the waters up in heaps for them. So this is the Exodus, getting across the water. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a fiery light. He cleft rocks in the wilderness and gave them drink abundantly as from the deep. What's that referencing?
To Moses.
Right? So it's Exodus 17 when Moses brought the rock out of the water out of the rock. He made streams come out of the rock and caused waters to flow down like rivers. So this is so it's recounting the Exodus, and everybody would have known this. I mean, the whole story would have been flooding in their mind. They were very literate. This is what their imagination was filled with, was the story of the Exodus. So the whole story. And so he's gone to the waters of Marah and the bitterness, and threw the rock in, and he breaks this other rock, and the water comes out. So they had all that in their mind. And so what was the response of the people, the ancestors? Verse 17, yet they sinned still more against him, rebelling against the Most High in the desert. They tested God in their heart by demanding the food they craved. Okay, so what are they talking about now? The manna. So Exodus 16, when he rained down manna on them. But now notice how this is being recounted. The spin, I guess, is being put on it. So they spoke against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? He smote the rocks so that water gushed out and streams overflowed. Can he also give bread and provide meat for his people? Okay, so this is the first big problem that the psalmist is trying to teach against. So the first big mistake that Israel made in being unfaithful to God was that they demanded and craved more than they had been given. So God was providing for them, but then they complained about it. He delivered them from Israel, or he delivered them from Egypt and brought them across the Red Sea. And what do they do? You guys remember the story, right?
Yeah, well, they were talking about turning back because
right?
they were like, well, we had food there.
Yeah, they've got McDonald's there, all the fries I need.
Can you blame them? I mean, have you seen the desert?
Have you seen the desert? Well, have you seen a sea open up and that you walk across some dry land and then it close up on your enemies that saved you from being slaughtered, and then a fiery pillar by night?
It's human nature to wonder, like, is he going to still continue?
Yeah, he's going to still continue. But it's very interesting. He said, we should go back to Egypt and be slaves because at least we could fill our bellies. So it's really about gluttony. It's not about survival. It is about gluttony. Okay, trust me on this one. Right? So they had what they needed, and then they wanted more. They demanded more. Therefore, when the Lord heard, he was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger mounted against Israel. And Jacob and Israel, when they use these names, he's talking about the nation, the people. Because they had no faith in God and did not trust his saving power. Right? And it's kind of what you were saying. Is he still going to do? Is he going to take care of us? What's going to happen? But that's not trusting in God.
Well, sometimes nothing does happen. So what are we supposed to do with that? There are people that starve to death all the time.
Sure.
And that ask and do not receive. So
what are you doing about it? That's when God says you'll always have the poor with you, because we allow the people to be poor. And he also didn't tell the poor to, he's not guiding them out of Egypt.
But
right?
I mean, people do give money and give
don't
supplies.
Turn this into like a social justice thing. This is salvation history. Right? So he told Moses, bring the people, I'll take care of them, we'll go to the promised land, I'll give them milk and honey. Right? And they said, milk and honey, I'm lactose intolerant. Could you make it some kombucha? Right? That's what it is they're being ungrateful for the gifts he's given them and then demanding what they crave. And we see that even more. It doesn't really show up. It shows up a little bit coming up, but this whole thing about, let's get there and then we'll talk about it. Therefore, the Lord heard he was full of wrath. A fire was kindled against Jacob. His anger mounted against Israel because they had no faith in God and did not trust his saving power. Yet he commanded. So even though they didn't trust him, yet he commanded the skies above and opened the doors of heaven and rained down upon them manna to eat and gave them the grain of heaven. So even though they complained, man ate of the bread of the angels. He sent them food in abundance. Then he caused the east wind to blow in the heavens by his power. He let out the south wind. He rained flesh upon them like dust, winged birds like the sand of the seas, and he let them fall in the midst of their camp all around their habitations. So that's when he brought in the pheasants, quail, whatever it was, when he brought them in. And remember the story, right? He was feeding them with manna. They had all they needed to survive. But they're like, a little steak would be nice right about now. Can you give me a little bit of poultry? And they complained against him. So he did. They ate and were well filled, for he gave them what they craved. But before they had sated their craving, while the food was still in their mouths, the anger of God rose against them. He slew the strongest of them and laid low the picked men of Israel. That's the part you don't like, where he seems grumpy.
Right? No, that's the part I do like, because they finally get their comeuppance.
Because they get their comeuppance, so our sense of vengeance is fulfilled. But I think this is very interesting when I think about this in our contemporary context. And I think about it because in medicine, I don't think it's a technical term, so don't go telling Kelly that I'm telling stories. But the diseases that we suffer in the United States, doctors actually call, unofficially, it's not an official thing, they call them diseases of excess. So type 2 diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure and all these things that we're having, a lot of the diseases that are taking a toll on us is because of overconsumption. Mm-hmm. And they're entirely preventable. If you go to Africa and you go out to these tribal areas, they don't have these diseases. They've got other things going on. They're serious and life-threatening, but they don't have the diseases that we have, the high blood pressure.
All food causes a small amount of inflammation.
Yeah, food is a medicine. Food is a medicine, and then of course any medicine can become poison.
I'm making this up, or is the cancer rate in Africa super low comparatively speaking?
Probably. I don't know. I'd have to look at it. There's environmental context all over the place, but I don't want to. I have to be careful because I don't know. It would not surprise me. That would seem very credible to me.
I've looked at a lot of different countries, and they all have their thing. Japan has very high rates of bladder cancer because of their high salt consumption, but then they have low other things.
Sure, and then the French have famously the red wine. They didn't have they have low blood pressure or something like that. There's all kinds of But anyway, it's interesting to me that if God gives us over to our cravings and demands, it ends badly for us. Right? The whole problem is they're craving and demanding more than they were given. God was giving them what they needed and they wanted more. You go back to the book of Judges, and they will reference that in another 30 verses or so. But the book of Judges, man did what was right in his own eyes, and there was no king in Israel. And that's a refrain that goes to the book of Judges. And if you read the book of Judges carefully, what it does, it goes from having judges who represented the will of God to the people just doing whatever they wanted and having rejected all authority. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the book is this terrible story of the Levite concubine or whatever it's called, where they chop her up in pieces and send her out to the tribes. And then they go and they slaughter the tribe of Benjamin, and they only have a few men left over. And so they have to go basically steal women from another tribe so they can repopulate the tribe of Benjamin. It's a terrible story. And people read that and they go, look how brutal the Bible is and what terrible people they are. But no, that's actually the point, is once you abandon the providence of God and left to our own device, our own fallen devices, because our hearts haven't been purified and our consciences haven't been enlightened, left in the darkness of our hearts to ourselves, we end up badly.
That's why I don't let kids take things off my desk. And you laughed at me. You laughed at me, but they then went into my garden and they stole my tomatoes and they stole my gourds and they smashed them on the ground.
We'll talk about that later. This isn't time for that.
This is kind of reminding me of something that happened with my best friend's kids. And they were complaining about all these rules and stuff that their parents had on them and regulations. And I said, okay, what are your rules going to be? And they're, of course, saying, stay up late, eat candy.
Chocolate cake for breakfast.
How long is that going to work out well for you? And it's like the adult version of
It's Lord of the Flies.
Yes.
I mean, that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's Lord of the Flies. But anyway, so that's the point. Is once we cast ourselves off from God's providence and demand what we want, probably not going to end well.
Prodigal son.
In spite of all this, they still sinned. Despite his wonders, they did not believe. So he made their days vanish like a breath, and their years in terror or dismay. When he slew them, they sought for him. They repented and sought God earnestly. So here's the tough love part of the psalm, right? When he punished them, then they said, "Oh God, we want you to take care of us." They remembered that God was their rock, the Most High God, their Redeemer. But they flattered him with their mouths, and they lied to him with their tongues. Their heart was not steadfast toward him. They were not true to his covenant. So it's this falseness. They're just basically saying what he wants to hear. Now, this next verse, 38, I'm going to make a big point of, because it doesn't fit the poetic meter. Now, I wouldn't have noticed that. When you look at it now, it clumps together the way the other verses don't. So you can kind of, oh yeah, it has more words. It doesn't flow as easily. But what's very interesting about this is it's obviously not part of the poetic recitation that the rest of the psalm is. So different scholars have different ideas about it. Generally, what they say is it's some kind of dogmatic formula that gets plugged in. It's almost like in a service, all of a sudden we'll quote a line from scripture and it changes the rhythm, but it's illustrating what we want it to illustrate. So this is some kind of a dogmatic statement, some statement about who God is being slipped in. Yet he, being compassionate, forgave their iniquity, did not destroy them. He restrained his anger often and did not stir up all his wrath. Now, as we get to the end of the psalm, I'm going to make the argument that one of the ways you can understand the point of a psalm is by the things that stick out. So this particular verse is meant to kind of jolt you. So they're going to, reading this psalm in the Hebrew, having it presented and recited the way it would have been, this verse would kind of almost feel like a little hiccup, right? And so this is the answer to being unfaithful, to forgetting God, to demanding our cravings and chasing after our desires. And yet God, being compassionate, forgave their iniquity and did not destroy them and restrained his anger off and did not stir up his wrath. And so that's what we have to keep coming back to. And like looking at our ancestors who didn't keep the covenant and didn't follow the law and sinned against God, how do we still have a relationship with God? Because he is compassionate and he forgives and he does not destroy. And again, when I say these things, we always want to look at Israel as the bad guys and Christians as the good guys because, but when we read these Psalms, we're Israel. And so are we demanding, listen, we live in a consumer society. Everything we do is based on our cravings and desires and demands. And if we don't have enough, then we go get more. I'm not going to go on a tirade about that. He remembered that they were but flesh, a wind that passes and comes not again. How often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. They tested him again and again and provoked the Holy One of Israel. They did not keep in mind his power, or the day when he redeemed them from the foe, when he wrought his signs in Egypt, his miracles in the fields of Zoan. Zoan must be the area of Egypt. He turned their rivers to blood, so they could not drink of their streams. Oh, disappointment. Anybody want to put it in the chat? What's he talking about? Turn their rivers to blood, they could not drink of their streams?
And the rivers ran red with blood.
And the rivers ran red with blood. He sent among them swarms of flies, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them. He gave their crops to caterpillar, and the fruit of their labor to the locust, destroyed their vines with hail, their sycamores with frost. What are we talking about?
The plagues?
Yes, Charlton Heston. Let my people go.
So we're going backwards in history.
Right. Yeah, he's not proceeding. So yeah, that's a great point.
It looks like he's talking about like now.
Right. So he does. The psalmist does not feel them. It doesn't have to be a chronological recitation.
That's what I was getting.
Yeah. No, he said, look, he took us out from Exodus, and we're ungrateful. And having seen all these miracles and telling the children about this, and we still didn't follow his commandments. So the rivers of blood. By the way, there's only 7 plagues that are recounted in the Psalm, and they're not in the same order they are in the Old Testament. But that's, again, it's not a historical recitation. It's just he's just saying these things.
This might be getting too nitpicky, but he's referring to they the whole time. But it seems like initially, whenever it was talking about they, it was talking about the chosen people or whatnot. But
there's no pronoun antecedent agreement.
But now it seems to be talking more about how he treated the Egyptians, or I guess the
well, they suffered from
Sure.
Okay.
He's not keeping on. And he brought his signs and Egypt's miracles. Okay. So he turned their rivers to blood. He's talking about the Egyptians. No, because he also talks about the he gave over their cattle to the hail and their flocks to the thunderbolts. He let loose on them his fierce anger, wrath, indignation, distress, accompanied of destroying angels. He made a path for his anger, and he did not spare them from death, but gave their lives over to the plague. Okay, he smote all the firstborn in Egypt, the first issue of their strength and tents of hand. Go ahead.
Mine says evil angels.
It's a destroying. It's a destroying angel.
They were just.
Yes, the angel. Yes, the angel of death. Right, and it's a destroying angel. Yeah, what translation?
Plural for
Orthodox Study Bible.
Oh, so it's New King James.
Why would they do that?
Because it's probably the word in Greek. They probably use poniros. Because remember, I mean, well, we don't need to draw on that rabbit trail. He starts with the river, turning the rivers to blood, and then he ends with the firstborn, which is those are the kind of bookends, the way the story goes. But he's just recounting these things. But to your point, shifting where the pronoun goes, that happens all the time. You actually sometimes go from, he is God, the great and almighty, and then all of a sudden it's talking about I, and it's God's voice. And so sometimes it's tricky to read the Psalms. I'll point those times out for you, but they go back and forth. He'll go he, and then you, as they go through it. Anyway, we got to speed up a little bit. Then he led forth his people like sheep, guided them in the wilderness like a flock. So all this is the wilderness, the Exodus. He led them in safety so they were not afraid, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies. He brought them to his holy land, to the mountain which his right hand had won. This is Exodus 15, the song of the sea again. He drove out nations before them. He apportioned them for possession, settled the tribes of Israel in their tents. So he went right from the flight from Egypt to being in the promised land. He skips all the other stuff, right? And so he gives them the land. Yet, and now this is the second big problem. So there's 2 sections to the psalm. So the first one was them wandering in the desert and craving and demanding more that God had provided for them. That's the first big problem the psalmist is trying to use this narrative to warn them against. The second problem is when you forget that God has provided these things, you start seeking divinity elsewhere.
This is the literature person in me, but it's 38 or verses 38 and 56 supposed to link up in any way? Because they both begin with yet. And
no, they don't. No, because they're different. Yet there's a connector in Greek that's a lot of times translated as yet and then kind of thing. There are some other places. The next psalm, if we get there now that I've gotten there are words like in Psalm 79, poured out. That links 3 of the verses together. Anyway, yet they tested rebelled against the Most High God and did not observe his testimonies, but turned away and acted treacherously like their fathers. They twisted like a deceitful bow. So I don't know what your translation there is, but it's treacherous bow. So it's the idea is you go to pull the bow, but then you slip at the last second and spin around, the arrow shoots somewhere you don't want it to go. So the bow is not steadfast. For they provoked him to anger with their high places. They moved him to jealousy with their graven images. When God heard, he was full of wrath, utterly rejected Israel. He forsook his dwellings at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among men, and delivered his power to captivity, his glory to the hands of the foe. Okay, so this next thing is worshiping false gods, seeking other things to worship. So they get there, they got the land of milk and honey, everything's good, God's delivered them. Even though they kept messing up, he kept being faithful, he brings them to this place, gives the land into their hands, and what do? Ooh, an Ashtoreth pole. I'm thinking I'm going to put one of those up. Ooh, Baal. I think he's got some cool stories. I'm going to go worship him. And then they start being faithless again. So this. And by the way, this is not. What's what I'm looking for? This is not confined to just Israel. This is not a historical thing that happened and that we don't have to worry about anymore. But these are the two big things that we still struggle with. And we struggle feebly with it. We've been mostly overtaken by it. But chasing after our cravings and demands and worshiping anything and everything except for God. But, I mean, that's, if you wanted to give a shorthand description of our culture, it's we chase after our desires and we worship everything except for God.
Again, you can almost see that dynamic in the parents and children relationship. How the children constantly don't do what their parents say, but then come running back to their parents and things go wrong. And then they start ignoring their parents again. And I mean, it's good.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Forsook his dwelling at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among men. Do we know that story? That's mostly Judges and 1 Samuel. So when I know, oh no. So the dwelling at Shiloh is where the was where the Ark of the Covenant was kept in the northern kingdom. And then that
whole
fell.
Inner tent and outer tent thing.
No, I mean, there was
the bells on the priests in case they die. So
well, that's true, and that's actually not true. That's one of the things
Oh.
that's always been taught. I taught it for a long time, and somebody said, actually, no, it's not it. Like, oh, okay.
One thing I know. Okay.
I know, exactly. Great. So the Ark of the Covenant was, before there was a temple in Jerusalem, you had a tabernacle in Shiloh. And that's where they kept the Ark of the Covenant, and they would take it out before the armies. And then when they were faithless, then they took the Ark from Shiloh and abandoned it, and then it went to Jerusalem. And that's the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh and Benjamin were up in the north, and then Judah was down by Jerusalem. And Judah was a nothing tribe, and Ephraim and Manasseh were huge. And so you're going from the powerful to the marginal, and that just shows God's providence. That's how he works. If you start trusting in your own power, he's going to take it and he'll go give it to somebody else. But this is part of that story. Anyway, he gave his people over the sword, vented his wrath on his heritage. Fire devoured their young men, and their maidens had no marriage song. Their priests fell by the sword, and their widows made no lamentation. I mean, this act goes all back to the fall of the northern kingdom. Then the Lord awoke as from sleep, like a strong man shouting because of wine. Shaking off of wine is really a better translation. I don't know how they got shouting because of wine. And he put his adversaries to rout, and he put them to everlasting shame. So it's like, then the Lord awoke as from sleep. So it's only an analogy, all right? So let's keep that in mind. But they're basically saying God was like passed out drunk and let all this bad stuff happen. And he woke up and went, oops, I better do something about it. I mean, it's a very unflattering image, I think. But the idea is that God gives us over to punishment, but only for a time. And he's going to wake up. He's going to reappear, if we can use that phrase, and rout the enemy. But there's a consequence. He rejected the tent of Joseph. Notice he doesn't say Jacob. He doesn't say Israel. He says the tent of Joseph, because Joseph got split into the two tribes, Ephraim and Manasseh, the two half tribes. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loves. So this is the idea of the kingdom moving from the center of power, being the northern kingdom, into Jerusalem, to Judah. He built his sanctuary like the high heavens, like the earth, which he's founded forever. He chose David, his servant, and took from him his sheepfold. Took him from the sheepfolds, from the tending the ewes that had young. He brought him to be the shepherd of Jacob, his people, of Israel's inheritance. With upright heart, he shepherded them and guided them with a skillful hand. So that image of David as a shepherd is implicit in the Old Testament histories, but it's made explicit in the Psalm, that the king is a shepherd to the people. Now, and I know I rushed through all that, but that's the second part, was is the defeat of the northern kingdom, probably under the Assyrians, but I don't need to get into history right now. I'm sorry, my mind's spinning in circles. I'm trying to see how I can summarize this real quick. But the tabernacle, the presence of God, was taken from Shiloh and then placed in Jerusalem, where the temple was under David, and the kingdom then became centered in the Davidic dynasty. So this psalm was written probably either under Josiah or Hezekiah in periods that were trying to strengthen the Davidic succession, the Davidic line, and saying, this Davidic. So that's why it ends with this emphasis on David being the king that was chosen by God. What's my little last note here saying? Right, the explicit making the kingly thing. It feels very anticlimactic to finish up that psalm, but that's that's where we are. Any questions? Like I said, that was a really anticlimactic way to finish up that psalm. That was lame.
I didn't hear it.
I know. Just because you took off. Just talking about God being drunk.
Yeah, what's up with that?
I know I could get her going. It's just an image. It's just a metaphor. I mean, it's not saying God was drunk. He said he rose as someone who had been drunk. And it's just him. There's this sense that God gives us over to punishment, but only for a season.
I did not get that.
That's not what you got from it?
Yeah.
What did you get from it?
Nothing.
That God's arbitrary and angry?
No,
if you're thinking it's somebody else's, you might as well ask.
Well, some of the things in here, it makes it seem like God is like he's supposed to be omnipotent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or omniscient.
Yeah.
He knows what's going to happen. So it's kind of like it seems like they're painting God as he's going to indulge everything that they want, and he knows you're going to fail. And then he's like, why did you fail? Now I'm going to kill you all and slaughter your children and enslave your people.
Makes it sound very arbitrary.
How dare you? Even though, by the way, I knew this was going to happen. And then, oh, you're going to be nice? Okay, well, I'll step back.
Yeah, you're reading a whole lot into the psalm. You're importing a whole lot of stuff, which is okay. So here's the thing. Remember that the Psalms are an illustration of our experience of God. And Israel has a very complicated experience of God. But the thing about the Psalms that's beautiful is that it captures all of that. So there's times when we probably feel like God's being pretty arbitrary. Mm-hmm. And the next Psalm's a perfect example of that, Psalm 79, where it's like, look, you need to wake up. How long are you going to be this way? I've been asking for help, and I've been treading water a long time. I'm kind of tired, and you need to show up because you said you'd show up. What's going on? But you also have to be careful how you read it, because you can't project your own frustrations onto it and not read it carefully. But it's not so much that God is this arbitrary, at his whim kind of, whatever. There's actually a very clear plan of sanctification. But that sanctification has to occur within our freedom. So there's this constant tug of war between the freedom he offers us and then the attempt and the effort to draw us to sanctification. Right? So he could just say, everybody's sanctified and be done with it, but then we'd be automatons.
Well, no, but it still seems too confusing.
If it wasn't confusing,
it's so simple.
No, well, in some sense it is extremely simple. It's very straightforward. In other senses, it's extremely complicated and difficult to understand. If it wasn't, you wouldn't need Bible study.
I feel like it's easy to say, like, oh, love God,
think about your students, right? There's a constant tug of war. You sound grumpy toward your students right now, so be careful what to say.
Yeah.
But there's a constant tug of war of giving them enough freedom to actually learn and grow and mature, and knowing that they're going to steal your tomatoes if you let them do that. So where do you draw that line and hold that tension? And some days you're going to go ahead and let them steal the tomatoes, and other days you're going to be out there with a hose, and as soon as they reach the tomato, you're going to hit them in the face, right? You know what I mean? Like it's this constant almost dance between, this is true in parenting.
That's true, but if I was God, I could anticipate Oh crap.
So that takes their freedom out, right?
Yes.
And you're right. He knows we're going to be disobedient. He knows that we're going to fail. And yet he is, what's the verse 38 we talked about?
He's merciful.
He's compassionate, forgave their iniquity, and did not destroy them, restrain his anger off them. Right? I know my kids are going to break stuff in the house. I still get angry when they do. That's my imperfection. But I know they're going to break something at some point. Right? But if they don't break it, they're not going to learn to be careful with things. And they're not going to learn, you see? I mean, it's like there's that. So that's the tension that goes back and forth. And that's what happened all through the Old Testament. Because God said, okay, let's see what you do with it. We don't really know. But there seems to be an indication that, yes, that kind of tension is not going to be part of our eternal existence.
I like to go down a rabbit hole then, but I'll avoid it.
Yeah, we'll skip that. Let's keep going. Psalm 79. We might get through this one. So this is very similar to Psalm 74. It's a lament. It's a desperate cry for help. So you're going to have to read it in that sense.
It's like 74 or 70.
74. 74 is one. Oh God, why have you cast out forever your anger smoke against us, the sheep of your pasture? Remember that one? How long, O God, is a foe to scoff, as the enemy to revile my name forever? So this is probably written after the exile when they sent off to Babylon and Jerusalem's been wiped out. You can tell that by some of the references they make. But these are one of those Psalms that's really good for us to know, because you're going to feel like this at some point. You know, it's like, God, where are you? Wake up. Come on. I need you to listen to me. So let's kind of zip on through it. Oh God, the heathen have come into thy inheritance, right? So those who do not believe in God have now taken over the things of God. So God, you provided for us this the vineyard, but that's going to be the next one, is a really strong vineyard metaphor. But you provide this vineyard, you made it all nice for us, and now you've let other people into it. So you've taken away our inheritance.
73 also, because 73 talks about how all the bad people get all the good stuff.
Right. Yeah, well, that's different. This one is, why have you abandoned us? He's not worried about the bad people getting good stuff. He's wondering, why have you abandoned us? Not so much that, oh, those bad guys have Jerusalem, but why did you take Jerusalem away from us? It's a different angle on it. Oh God, the heathen have come into thy inheritance. They have defiled your holy temple. They have laid Jerusalem in ruins. That's why you know it's post-exile. They've given, what says bodies here, but that's being polite. They've given the corpses of your servants to the birds of the air for food. And that's gruesome. The flesh of your saints to the beasts of the earth. They've poured out their blood like water round about Jerusalem, and there was none to bury them. We become a taunt to our neighbors, mocked and derided by those around us. Not a rosy picture. Okay, so this is despair and despondency, utter defeat, and feeling abandoned. I mean, imagine that. I mean, the leaving the corpses for the birds and the animals to feed on, and not even being able to give them honor of burial, and the temple's been burned down, and the whole city laid to waste, and you're being dragged off into exile. And yet you still proclaim an almighty and all-powerful God who loves you. That's a very striking thing to do. How long, O Lord? And here's where they're like, wait a second, what are you doing? And how long is this going to last? We keep expecting you to show up and you don't. How long, O Lord, will you be angry forever? Will your jealous wrath burn like fire? Pour out your anger on the nations that do not know you, and on the kingdoms that do not call on your name. For they have devoured Jacob and laid waste to his habitation. So that poured out is important, right? So you've poured out their blood, spilt blood. It's actually the images of spilt blood. And he's saying, spill out your anger. So just as they have spilt our blood, you spill out your anger on them. Do not remember against us the iniquities of our forefathers, which is a great little line to throw in there. Yeah. We know that they didn't listen, didn't keep your commandments, and you warned them and said this would happen, and they did it anyway, and now it's happening. But forget all that for now, please.
Psalm 78, or 78.
Yeah, forget Psalm 78. We get that. But let your compassion come speedily to meet us. So this is the tension that shows over and over in the Psalms. And it's really important for us to internalize for our own spiritual lives, our own kind of social imaginary, is that God's compassion and mercy and forgiveness does not depend on our good behavior. And that's important to understand, because our behavior can sometimes get pretty rotten. And then we think, God's not going to forgive this. God's not going to forgive this. God's not going to forgive this. Yes, he will. But we're going to be exposed to the consequences of our ill behavior, right? So we get let off into exile, and God hasn't abandoned us. Even if we feel abandoned, even if we feel God is still with us, and we still call upon his mercy and his compassion. Do not remember against us the iniquities of our forefathers. Let your compassion come speedily to meet us, for we are brought very low. Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of your name, right? The glory of your name, not for anything we've done, for the glory of your name. So if you're the God of Israel, and we're your covenant people, and the nations have wiped out Israel, what does that say about you? Right? Don't worry about us. Worry about your name, your reputation. That's what they're saying. That what they're really saying is, if you are the God who saves, then save. If you truly are the God who saves us, here's a good chance to show it. Right? It's a bold way of praying, isn't it?
Self-serving way.
Well, I mean, they're being let off into captivity, right?
Who would not want to be saved? Like, why is that?
Right. I'm not sure. I mean, why should the nations say, "Where is their God?" Let the avenging of the outpoured blood. So that pour. That's what I told you is going to link the three parts of the psalm. So Jerusalem's been destroyed. They poured out their blood. You pour out your anger and vengeance on us, or vengeance on behalf of us, and then let the avenging of the outpoured blood of your servants be known among the nations before our eyes. Let the groans of prisoners come before you according to your great power. Preserve those doomed to die. So we're being let off. They figured they were going to be killed when they got to Babylon. So they kind of have this sense of dead men walking. We're going to be destroyed. Save us. Let the groans of prisoners come before you according to great power. Preserve us who are doomed to die. Return sevenfold into the bosom of our neighbors the taunts which they have taunted you, O Lord. Then we, your people, the flock of your pasture, will give thanks to you forever. From generation to generation will recount your praise. So even in their defeat, and even in we can't. It's hard to imagine a defeat like Jerusalem suffered. I mean, to have the entire city wiped out, the kingdom destroyed, the temple burnt to the ground, and everybody dragged off into captivity in Babylon. It doesn't get much more absolute than that. And to say that you worship an almighty God becomes really hard to say. And yet they still said it. Their faith was still in God, even in the midst of everything saying otherwise. That's why this psalm is important, because this is a lament and a cry out to God's help when, how could you possibly expect God to help you in the midst of this?
But in verse 8, they kind of acknowledge, yeah, we kind of were asking for it.
Yeah, to a degree. Not that we're asking for it. It's like, okay, yeah, we get our forefathers' sin, but just have compassion upon us. But it really is, and I guess that kind of is coming out as we talk today. The theme of it is this idea that our sin has consequence. And just because we suffer because of our sin does not mean that it's God's punishment on us, as much as it's simply the consequence of our sin. He's not going to abandon us.
The parent tells the child not to touch the hot stove.
And you touch the hot stove and burn your hand.
That's not because the parent burned them.
Correct. Yes.
It's the consequence.
Right. Okay. Do you want to try and rush through 80? Or do you want to save it for next week? It's a prayer for deliverance. It's pretty much the same. It's got this really cool extended metaphor of a vine. That you brought a vine out of Egypt, you cleared the ground around it, you planted it, you watered it, you kept it safe. And then you let the wild animals come in and eat it. Right? And they're talking about Egypt, the Israel being the vine coming out of Egypt, and then cleared out the land and planted it and took care of everything. And then they've been left off into Babylon, and all the heathens have destroyed it. We'll talk about that a little bit next week. And there's a refrain in there: restore us, O God, let your face shine that we may be saved. We can talk about that a little bit more. Very good. That brings us to the end, I guess, of our time. And there we go. Any questions? I'll babble for just a little bit to see if any questions pop up in the group chat. Jennifer showed up. Oh, and you figured out a way to put your picture on your little thumbnail. Very nice. All the rest of us just have our names up there. Questions from the peanut gallery?
Nothing.
The Zoom? I don't know how to use this stuff. If I had a thumbnail, it'd probably be, I don't know what it would be. What character, what cartoon character would I be?
Calvin from Calvin Hobbes.
I could do that, but I'm just not that clever. I don't know. Not seeing any questions in the group chat. I figured you did. Yeah. So Jennifer's saying she's Zoom for her classes, so she has all that. She's probably got all this stuff. You need to come give me a class on it sometime then, so I can. I was just using the wrong channel earlier, and so the first 15 minutes of Bible study didn't get recorded. But that's okay. Such is life. All righty. Well, we'll close with prayer and be done. If I don't see any more questions. Very good. Okay. God bless you all. O holy apostle and evangelist Luke, make intercession to our merciful God, that he grant our souls remission of offenses. Lord Jesus Christ, our God, please watch over us, guys, and protect us. Give these your servants safe passage to their homes. Watch over all those who watch online. Bless them, watch over them, guide them, and protect them. For your holy name, forever in the ages of ages. Amen. 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 Quick public service announcement, and then I'm going to stop recording. October 19th is our parish family picnic for our feast day. So remember, on the 17th, which is Thursday evening, we'll have Vespers at 7, followed by a reception for our feast day. And then on the 18th, we'll have liturgy in the morning for the feast day of St. Luke, and we will be churching the little baby Lucas. Meshoplis, his new baby. And then on Saturday is the big event at 2 at Lake Norman State Park at the Heron Picnic Shelter, whatever. It's right by the visitor center. But that's where we're going to have our big picnic and have a good time. And we'll also be unveiling our plans to build a new church and the land that we're looking at and everything else like that. God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening, and I will talk with you soon. Goodbye.